Okay, we're good to go. We're streaming on YouTube.
Okay. All right.
We're missing David and Chantel, I believe.
Yeah.
There's David. I just saw him come up. Good evening, David.
Good evening, everyone.
Hi, David.
Hi.
You look like Dr. Fauci with that black sweater.
Yeah.
David Agus, CBS. Every morning he's on with a black sweater and a white shirt.
Is that right?
Yep.
Looking authoritative. How these with these readers do I look even more authoritative?
Yeah, that's better.
I need these readers for this budget, Doug.
You,
8-point font.
Yeah, yeah.
nice magnifying glass. You're going to be looking down most of the meeting, I suspect.
Yes, yes. Yeah, it's hard to make numbers exciting, but it's something we must do.
Well, I suspect Chantel is on her way. It's 1 after, so why don't I go ahead and call this meeting to order of the October 15th budget workshop for the Oxford City Council. Mr. Elliott, will you please call the roll?
Yes. Counselor Southard,
Yes, here.
Counselor Prithridge,
Here.
Counselor Ellerby,
Here.
Counselor Bracken,
Here.
Vice Mayor Snavely,
Here,
and Mayor Smith.
Here.
And
All
so
right.
I'll put Chantel down when she arrives then.
All right. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to City Manager Elliott to take us through our proposed budget.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the fiscal year 2021 proposed operating budget. I have with me this evening, as usual, all of the department heads who will help me answer any questions you might have regarding the city manager's proposed budget for fiscal year 2021. As you know, what we provided you was a budget by line item, and we do not pass an appropriation ordinance by line item. For each program and activity, we basically budget by personnel services, by operating expenses and capital outlay. So we are bound to stay within those, but we give you a line item budget to explain how we plan to spend that money within those three categories. So I wanted to share with you that I do have a PowerPoint to go through. And I did that primarily in case we have any residents that might want to watch us, and they can probably follow the discussion with this. And with that, I also want to share with you when I am finished and answer any questions you have, Finance Director Joe Newland would like to present some information to you as well. So with that, let's get started. Hopefully you all have your budget book either in hard copy or digital copy to follow. And so next slide, Jessica. So you have the proposed operating budget. It's an essential and sustainable budget. It funds our core services and programs. We did not eliminate any existing programs. It includes contracted pay adjustments. We have 3 unions within the police department. And it also includes a pay adjustment for the non-union. We did not include a pay raise for the firefighter paramedics because we're going to be negotiating a contract with them. We did not make any changes to our employer-provided health insurance program. You'll note too in the revenue sections that we forecast a continued decline in our income tax and hotel tax revenue, plus our interest on investments. That's taking a nosedive. So what you have before you tonight with those reduced revenues is a balanced budget, which I will go through with you. Next slide, please, Jessica. So a general fund summary would be the proposed operating expenditures are just over $11 million. And that's a 1.3% increase or $141,733 from the 2020 budget. This is due to increases in salaries, wages, and related withholding costs, plus replacement of police body cameras and data storage. We're very happy, and so is the PCRRC with our body cameras, and they're nearing the end of their useful life. And we also have to add some data storage. So that's at $40,000. You'll see that in the police budget. General fund revenues, excluding our advances and transfers, are estimated at just over $12 million. And this is a 5.6% decrease or just over $700,000 from our fiscal year 2020 budget, or an 8.3% decrease or just over $1 million from our 2019 actual. This is primarily due to our declining income tax revenue. You'll see that it's declining by 5.3%. That's our estimate. And as you know, the income tax shoulders the biggest portion of our revenue burden, and that provides 71%. And then the local property tax provides about 9.9% of general fund revenues. Next slide. So basically within the general fund, the security of persons and property, which is police, traffic control, and street lighting, comprises about 53.1% of our general fund operating expenditures. And that it increased by $143,529 or 2.5%. Leisure time activities increased by a little over $68,000 or 4%. So once again, you have a very fiscally responsible and sustainable proposed budget as it relates to the general fund for fiscal year 2021. And the plan, as usual, is to have a first reading of this budget ordinance on the first meeting in November and a second reading on the second meeting of November. I also want to point out that it includes several environmental initiatives. We're including in there and that's in the capital outlay, the switching out of our street lights to LED. And then we're also including in our program a replacement for the staff car and with an environmentally friendly car, an electric car. And we are also going to be putting in some charging stations, one at lot 52 and then one at the parking garage.
Do you want to have discussion as we go, or do you want everything at the end?
That's a good question. I can entertain questions as we go.
Because I was glad to see those environmental additions to the budget. I think it would be good, given our second goal of our council, strategic goal, that we might do a little bit more. And I'd like council at some point to discuss whether we could have a solar project included. So I don't know when that best time for that is.
Yeah, and as you know, there is in the capital 5-year capital program some money for a solar farm, but I still want to pursue, and if time allows it, we're so busy with the CARES Act funding and everything else, but I would like to work on a RFP where the company would lease land from us so it would be at no cost to the city project. I'd like to pursue that rather than spending money to do a project like that ourselves. But that's a good point. we are committed to doing more. It's going to be tough with this existing revenue environment that we face. No one really knows for sure how long this slow, sluggish economy is going to last, and that's a big unknown. So thank you for that question, Bill.
Yeah, I would entertain that, but I do think I don't want to have that precluded because of how we talk about the budget. And to me, it's an investment because over time it should be able to pay back dividends.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, the next slide is in the general fund. So what I've done is typically we go through page by page. And so now we're going to focus on law enforcement. And if you have your digital or hard copy, it's page 8. And as you can see, law enforcement went up about 2.5% from the fiscal year 2020 budget. It includes the body cameras and the data storage, and it includes the contracted pay raises. The amount was about almost 140,000. Traffic control increased by about 2.4%. It kind of depends on when we, well, that doesn't include street lights, excuse me. So traffic control went up about 2.4%, about $2,000. Street lighting, we're showing that going up about 2%. And that's where I wanted to comment about, depending on when the conversion takes place, we may be reducing that line item because the electric usage will be less. And I believe Mike had shared with me that the payback is about, I want to say 5 years. And Mike, you can chime in if I've got that wrong.
Between 7 and 8 years, Doug.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I guess wishful thinking on my part. The next program is the Woodside Cemetery, and we've been able to maintain the same level of funding there. Public health, we basically pay an amount to the Butler County Board of Health, and they give us the amount and we pay that, and they're maintaining their same level of funding. When you take a look at community assistance, which is on page 13, we fund a number of agencies here locally. And as I pointed out in a memo to council earlier, we're unique in that situation. Very few communities do that. But we've done that since I've been city manager before. And we're basically decreasing it primarily because BCRTA, we did not include funding for them next year. The next one would be Senior Citizens and Community Center. And as you know, we signed a new lease with them, and they now maintain the cleaning of it. And so there's basically, we're maintaining the existing funding from last year's budget. The swimming pool, we're increasing that by about 1.9%, a little less than $5,000. Recreation program, that one went up 4.5%. And that's, I believe, and Joe, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, that's due primarily to the fact that the janitor used to be spread between this building, or excuse me, between other buildings besides the recreation facilities. And now that position is in the recreation programs 100%.
That's correct. Yeah, we had it in the budget last year that it was, or this current year, it was split 50-50, but that person does not work in City Hall, so we moved it to the department where the work is actually occurring.
Thank you, Joe. And then we have parks maintenance, and that went up 4.2%, a little less than 19,000. And that is due to an additional position. No, excuse me, that is due to the fact that the person that had that position retired, and the new person that we brought on has a slightly higher salary. We have then inspections, and that's on page, excuse me, I skipped planning. Planning.
Good planning.
Yeah, we don't want to skip that. Is on page 18, and that increased by $22,482. And we have in there monies to update the comp plan, and that's pretty much the reason for that increase. You'll note in there in 2021, we have an amount under contracted services of about $71,500. And I know we're going to probably discuss that more at the council meeting, our ideas, our plans there, and make sure we're in sync with city council on that. I don't know if you have any questions for us on that at this time.
I just want it to be a priority, and I'm open to the conversation.
Yeah.
So, and just so I understand, Doug, are you just providing an overview of the budgets and then we'll kind of dive into some of these things in a little more depth later?
Yeah, or you can ask questions now. You know, it's a little tough since, you know, we're not together, but feel free to go ahead and ask a question on that, and I'll ask Sam to address your questions there.
Yeah, well, whenever the right time. I mean, I'm anxious that we talk about it, and I'm anxious that, I mean, I do think the comprehensive planning, I'll just say that in general, I think this council's really long-range planning and strategic planning. We want to be goal-driven in everything that we do, and I think the comprehensive plan is one way to do that. I feel like I was making metaphor today, I feel like we have like 7 different circuses going on simultaneously in terms of climate action planning over here and housing over here and transportation over here and maybe policing and over here. And I think the comp plan process is a way to put them all under one tent. And so I hope that we can talk about what kind of goal we want with the plan and then budget accordingly, because I think $35,000 may not be adequate for what I think we may be hoping for out of our comp plan revision. But
It looks like it's 77,000. Is that wrong?
Well, contracted services includes 20,000 for the historic district design guidelines. And Sam, why don't you comment on that? I'll turn it over to you.
Sure, thanks. Yeah.
I
So
see it down at the bottom.
yeah, it's a pretty broad umbrella just because of the format we've used for so long. But yeah, we've got that divided out, and the approach that I put into the email response that I hope you received yesterday was the idea is to spread that cost out into more of a goal tracking system and split that off from the traditional comp plan update. But I think what would be helpful for whenever it's on the council agenda, if that's Tuesday or whenever it might be, is to kind of show a flow chart for what that process might look like so that we can get some more interactive discussion going on. And I think that would help. And I know David and I would probably need to talk one-on-one a little bit before then, but yeah, it's a different approach, but it's something that we would like to do rather than starting from a completely brand new comprehensive plan, just because of the amount of investment that may not be realized in return, just because of how many changes are going on right now with the various demands we have. So happy to talk more about it coming up, but it's something that Jessica and I are going to work on together as far as kind of splitting off the goal tracking from an overall comprehensive plan update, kind of a hybrid approach.
Okay. Well, let me go ahead and move on unless there's any other questions for Sam on that. But yes, we will certainly continue to have a discussion, and I'll ask Sam to make a presentation to council. Inspections, we had a decrease there of about 9.4%. Sam, you want to comment on that, how we changed things around there?
Sure. Yeah. So we had for a short time, we had a on-staff part-time zoning enforcement staff person, and we have moved that back into a contracted service. So part of the year this year, we did not actually spend some of those funds. So that's why there's a change there. And by having it contracted out, it is a lower cost because of some of the payroll that's not being used.
Thank you, Sam.
Mhm.
Affordable housing. Oh, Joe?
Yeah, part of the reason is if you look at the revenue coming into the general fund, less revenue and building permits, heating and whatnot. So we don't have the inspections to go along with it because it's like a 90%. They get 90% of those funds. So that's another reason they also decreased.
Thanks, Joe.
Yes, thanks, Joe. Okay, the next one is affordable housing, and we're showing an increase there of about, I think it's $600. And that's basically for rent assistance. And we received the application from the agencies. And Mr. Snavely, Councilor
Yeah.
Snavely?
Given the COVID and everything that's been going on, it seems like that's an area that could use a significant increase.
Okay.
We've already made some, funds available through the CARES Act, and we might need some more there.
Yeah.
It's better to have, I think, a larger line item and then not use it all than to not have enough for it.
Yeah, and I'll let, like I said, Joe's going to comment on our revenue situation in much more detail because we do have to provide a balanced budget, and our revenue situation is not really good right now. And like I said, so
That's true, but we also have a pretty significant overall surplus. If I'm looking at it right, that's the ending fund balance is 6.4 million. So I think we could probably afford 1,000 or 2
mhm.
in this area.
Again, we have to pass a balanced budget, so we'd have to decrease transfers for the capital improvement funds. So we'd be eating up their fund balances.
It's not a may I interject? It's not a problem, is it, to move funds later should it be necessary? If we suddenly find we absolutely have to. I mean, obviously COVID was totally unpredictable and unpredicted. And we are all dealing with it all the best we can economically and financially. And should there be a necessity, I'm sure that we would be flexible, wouldn't we?
I think so. I mean, we do supplementals, and if we knew that our situation was a little better than we had estimated, but yes, we do have a fairly healthy fund balance, but as you can see, it's been going down. And part of the issue is when we do the Oats trails, for example, if we don't have money from the levy, we have to advance it and then we get reimbursed, and that's true with other projects too. So anyway.
I hear that, but in 2018, the fund balance was 5.7 million and now it's 6.4.
Mhm.
So I don't think it's reasonable to say that overall we're going down. It's a little bit less than the 2020 budget, but it's almost, it's identical to the 2020 projected.
If I may, I do want to let you guys know, we do plan to bring forward the cold sheltering and transitional housing pilot program that will be for next year. And that'll be at a very soon meeting, maybe even in November. So just that's coming, and that will be like for a year around $74,000. Just wanted to plant that seed. And
Thank
also
you.
acknowledge that Councilperson Ragu has joined the meeting for the minutes.
Very good. Welcome, Council Ragu. Yeah, and that thank you, Jessica, for bringing that in, because this doesn't reflect any of the COVID spending. This money came in late in the year. We're spending it now, and so it's good to know to remind ourselves of this spending. So thank you, Jessica, for bringing that up. I appreciate that. All right.
Doug,
Yeah.
David's got a question.
So
Yes, Dave.
yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, and I guess I just want to say something now, because when we talk about things like affordable housing, I think that the council again wants to be goal driven, and Councilor Ragu has said to us many times that budgets reflect priorities. And so what I would appreciate, I mean, as we go through the budget, I mean, as a councilor, if we set priorities of housing for everyone, for example, I hope to see that priority reflected in the budget. And even within the constraints, if we have to make trade-offs, that those trade-offs go in the direction of the priorities. So as we work through, I would love to see, and Doug, you pointed out some of the things like the environmental initiatives, like the charging stations, as we could go through, if you could indicate the ways in which the budget seeks to reflect the priorities, I think that would help us a lot. If we see numbers, straight line from last year, then that's kind of a status quo budget. But if we can see that we can increase based on the priorities, I think that's That's why I care about comprehensive planning and strategic planning and how it connects to budgeting. So as we can talk through the goals and the budget, that would help us know that we're getting through on converting priorities into action. So that's, I guess, to echo Bill's comments, I guess.
Okay, I'll do my best. Okay. So urban forestry, maintaining funding in that program. Economic development, we are basically showing an increase of about 31.2%. But I do want to point out that that's due primarily to the reallocation of positions. As you know, the administrative offices here, since I've been here in 2007, have always had 5 individuals. So we've changed the duties of various positions. Kim, who used to be the assistant to the city manager, became the human resource person. And so we've changed them around, and this is reflected in the economic development program, in the HR program, which is listed as assistant city manager, and then my office as well too. So do not think that we have increased it by that amount. It's just a reallocation of positions.
We discussed the graphic design and professional printing of promotional materials, because that went up 1,400%.
Jessica, I'll turn that over to you.
Yes, hold on, let me get there. Yeah, it's up a lot, but it's $3,000 for the whole year. So for a graphic design and printing of, like, let's say one of our goals for economic development is like welcome materials to try to encourage people to move and live in Oxford when they're hired here. And so that might be a video, or it might be a pamphlet about living in Oxford. And so that would be the production of that type of product.
Thank you.
Okay, management information systems, that went up about 4.4%. That's just under $6,000. And we give you the breakdown of the contracted services there. The city manager's budget, once again, it did not decrease by that much. It just has more to do with the reallocation of positions. Before, I had the assistant to the city manager in there. And so we moved that over into the human resource. And then the newest employee that we've hired, Seth, is under the span of control of Jessica there.
Excuse me.
Go
We
ahead.
also, in the past, John Buckles has run through that department too. And
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, yeah.
And where's John now?
Economic development,
Okay.
helping Jessica.
And this reallocation basically reflects these changing assignments, if you will. All right. The next one is finance, and that increased by about 5.6%, or about a little less than $17,000. Income tax, we show that decreasing by about 1.5%. And of course, if we bring in less income tax revenue, we're going to pay RETA less. We have a contract with the Regional Income Tax Agency, and we pay them 3% of what we collect. So if we're estimating less income tax revenue, then it stands that we'll be paying them less. And then keep in mind that they basically calculate their administrative costs. And I believe every year that I've been here, since we've been using them, we've been getting a refund. So it's usually about, I want to say, Joe, and you can correct me, about 2.3 to 2.5% that they charge on administrative costs, something like that.
Joe, you're muted.
Yeah, after they back out what they're refunding us, it's more like 1.3%. They charge us 3% during the year, then they do a calculation at the end of the year and redistribute those funds to the different organizations that they collect taxes for.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. Then we show the law director position. Of course, that's now contracted out, and we're not showing any change in that. Of course, a lot of that depends on things that are outside the contract, like a court case, and we've been doing very well these past few years. Really, no new court cases. The ones that we had last year were, from previous years that ended up being settled. So no change in that program. Which brings us to page 28, which is what we call human resources / communications / assistant city manager. And once again, we have a reallocation of positions that we talked about: John Buckholz, Seth, and the human resource manager. So once again, that's just a reallocation of duties into the proper programs.
Well, John is the assistant to the city manager.
Seth is,
That's his title.
Yeah,
that's Seth's title.
That's
Yeah,
Seth's-
I don't
Well,
think John is charged to this program. He's primarily in economic development.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So not to confuse you, but yeah.
I
So
was confused. Thank you.
yeah, and we have these programs set up, but we're a jack of all trades office here. I mean, it's hard to say that they're focused on communications or human resources. I mean, Jessica has been spending, I want to say, practically all of her time working on this CARES Act funding for us.
Right.
And so we do what we have to do to get the job done. All right,
Change my title to all the things.
there you go. Jack of all trades.
Etc.
Yeah,
Et cetera. Yeah, that's it, etc.
but that's the nature of the beast in the city manager's office. I mean, that's the thing that's exhilarating. We never have a dull moment. We always have a lot of new projects and stuff, but that's also a frustrating point because, it's right now it's very, very fast paced for us. Okay.
Well, and if I could just interject it, because if I were sound critical about the lack of priorities being reflected, like for a number of years, we said communications was a priority. And so I think when I see an increase in printed budget materials and other communications, I see our priority. Like, I think things have moved in the direction the council asked for, and it's in the budget. So I'm appreciative of that.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Okay, clerk of council, and we're showing a slight increase there of about 2.2%, and that's about $2,000. Legislative, there's a $125 decrease. I'm not quite sure why, but your salaries are fixed by ordinance, and you're all at the current rate. And we're not doing much traveling these days, obviously, not going to the town and gown. What were you going to say, Joe?
Yeah, the reason it went down, because it's in, if you look, it's in fringe benefit or personnel benefits. Is
Liability.
because of our workers' comp rate for non-fire personnel went down compared to the year before. So that's why it's 150 less.
Okay.
And liability insurance.
Oh, because we had a better rate, and what I did is I based it a 5% increase off of what we actually spent this year. So it's reflected in there. It's actually going down a little bit, even though it's more than what we spent this year. It's just that we budgeted a higher rate last year and it didn't happen. We had no increase in rate in the liability insurance last year.
Thank you.
Right, now we're on to page 31. This is municipal building, and we're showing a decrease there of about 24.6%. And the reason for that is last year we had 1.5 custodial positions charged here. Now we only have 1. So this is for Joe's position. A city garage, we're showing a slight increase there, and of about 1.8%, and that turns out to be about $2,600. The courthouse, basically essentially the same budget. We're showing a slight decrease, 0.2%, $65. And then engineering increased by about 2.4%, about $3,800 there. And that's primarily due to the increase in the salary and wages. And basically we have one city engineer, one full-time engineering technician, one full-time engineering aide, and you can see the allocations for the various positions there to the other funds. And then the last program in the general fund is the contingency program, and we're budgeting the same amount that we usually do on that. So before I go on to fire EMS, are there any questions on the general fund? Okay. Hearing none, we'll switch over to the fire EMS fund. And as you know, we fund it with 0.25% of the income tax, which is dedicated to our fire program, can't be spent on anything else, fire and EMS. And we also, another major component is the EMS billing. You can see that in the revenues. So there was an increase of 1.2% within personnel services. And if you remember, I said I did not budget any money for an increase with the firefighter paramedics because we will be negotiating a contract, I believe, by the end of the year. The election is taking place soon. They're giving, I think, 2 weeks, and then they're going to let us know the results. It's a secret ballot for these individuals, but we did include a pay increase for the fire chief and his assistant in there, so that explains the increase. And obviously, there's a decrease because there's really no capital outlay compared to the year before when we purchased a fire truck. Which, John, when do you expect to receive that fire truck?
I would say it'll probably be beginning of second quarter, maybe.
All right. And then, of course, then we will bill Miami for their share of it. All right. Let me move on then to the street and the state highway funds. Street maintenance increased by 23.7%. And this is due to primarily to the capital outlays that are included in the street fund this year, which in past years we haven't done that, but we had a pretty good fund balance there, which enabled us to spend it out of there rather than our depleting capital funds. So it includes replacement of an existing bucket truck and a dump truck as well. And then in the state highway fund, which we're required by state law to have, there's no increase. We basically have a sum of money that comes in. And of course, we use it for those permitted uses that are spelled out there. The next slide deals with the parking and the parking improvement fund. We're showing the estimated parking fund revenues down. As you'll note, the estimated beginning fund balance for fiscal year 2021 is at basically $111,000, which is down from $738,801 in 2019. And that's the actual beginning fund balance. So quite a big difference in a couple of years there. And of course, as you can see, our parking revenues are down a lot. So one of the things that we've included in here is we're suspending the loan payment of $110,000, which goes from the parking fund to the capital improvement fund for 1 year to provide some relief to the parking fund. And what we're doing is we're adding a year on. The final payment was to take place in 2026, but you'll note that we've added a year on. So we're basically providing some relief for the parking fund for 1 year. And this, of course, is an interest-free loan that the Capital Improvement Fund made to the parking fund to construct the parking garage. So overall, we're showing in the expenditures about a 2% increase in expenditures there. And then you also have the Parking Improvement Fund, and we're showing a rather significant decrease there. And it's about 38.3%. And that has to do with the smart meters than the that we purchased this year. And I don't believe that amount is going to be the correct amount because, as you know, we decided to purchase 2 kiosks. But anyway, that's the big difference between this year and last year with the Parking Improvement Fund. So hopefully, we're starting to see some pickup in the parking fund, but it's nowhere where it's been in the past. I'm not going to go through the capital fund. We did that during the work session. So I'm not proposing any changes to the CIP, both the equipment and the improvement fund, and then the other related funds. So then I'll skip over to the water operating and improvement funds. And if you take a look at the water operating fund, and that one is on page, as far as expenditures go, there's a summary on page 68 there, and we're showing a slight overall slight decrease there. And of course, you have on the next page the water pumping and filtration, where we have most of our positions that work at the plant, and we're showing about a 1.2% increase there. Our water consumption is down. Mike, you want to comment on that for us? And that, of course, affects our revenue.
Yeah, we've seen consistent drops of about 5%.
Thank you, Mike. And so water distribution then, for the folks that are out in the field, we're showing a slight decrease there, about 3.5%. And that's reflected in the operating expense because we show an increase of a slight decrease in the personnel services as well. It has to do with hiring some new personnel there. And then the water distribution. Chantel?
Did you say consistently 5% decrease, or is that just over this past year because of COVID?
Mike?
It was because of COVID, with less population in town, less demand for water.
Okay.
So it's recovering some with the more people back in town, but between March and August, it was down.
I didn't know if there was some type of water saving mechanism at play.
No, we feel it's mainly just lower population in town.
Okay, and then water distribution overall is down about 3.5%, as you can see. We then show water administration, where we allocate 30% of the service director, 40% of the deputy service director, which is a part-time position, and 25% of the environmental specialist. So an increase of about 2.3%. And then, of course, we have the finance department, which has an allocation there that you can see, and that's increasing about 1.9%. We also allocate various items for the management information system to water, and that follows from the general fund MIS, about a 4.9% increase. City manager allocation coming in about 2.6. And that's just for the city manager's position, not the other positions that used to be in there. Otherwise, there'd be a decrease there since we reallocated those positions. Excuse me. The HR Communications Assistant City Manager allocation. Once again, this has to do with the reallocation of some positions there. So we're showing a 32.4% increase in that to the water operating fund.
Jessica, move the slide.
Yeah. The engineering allocation is about a 2.2% increase. And the legislative allocation, which is the mayor and the 6 council members, no increase. Water fund insurance, which is on page 78, no change there from the budget of 2020. So now we'll switch to the water improvement fund. All those had to deal with water operating. So now this is the water improvement fund. I need to get something to drink, excuse me. So there we're showing a decrease of about 35, excuse me, that's in receipts. The expenditures is a decrease of about 39% from the previous year. And that has to do with those different projects that we had included in 2020, which amounted to about 1.1 million. And all we're putting in there is the $680,000 for water improvements. So that explains the decrease. Then, of course, we have our water capacity benefit funds, and we have 4 quadrants. Basically, if you think of the boundary of the city as a square, we have a northeast quadrant, we have a northwest quadrant, southwest quadrant, and southeast quadrant. And basically, we're not budgeting any money in the northeast quadrant for next year. And for the northwest quadrant, not budgeting any money there. Similar for southeast and then southwest. And of course, if we do spend some money, it would be a supplemental that we would come into council for. But right now, we're not foreseeing any expenses for water. Water, go ahead.
Can I ask, the water softening project, which is not in the work, which is in the works but not implemented yet, how would that impact the water fund? Would that increase or decrease the water fund?
It would increase our expenditures as a capital project. So we may be talking to council about changing our rates. We have money in the 5-year capital equipment program. Mike, where are we at? I think we're expecting to get the engineering study back this year or the first of next year.
Thanks, Doug. Yes, we'll have the alternatives report in early November, and that will explain the pros and cons of all the different technologies and narrow down choices to a recommendation. And if we choose to proceed, then we would do a pilot plant, a scaled down version of the plant to make sure we get the results that we desire.
Thank you.
And so once we have an idea of what we're recommending to City Council, we would probably be providing you information on the effect on our rates so that you could make a informed decision on that as well.
But that wouldn't be implemented until 2022 or 23?
Mike?
Well, some of that will depend on how we get our permits. The EPA is not working as quickly as one might hope. And we also have to be very, very cautious about corrosion and controlling corrosion, especially in the mile square where we have a very old system.
Mhm.
So we're very fortunate. We've just got our lead and copper results back, and we're under 1 part per 1 milligram per liter. So That's one of the best results we've had for several years. So we're very pleased about that. And also, Doug, if I could mention, one thing you don't see here is debt service. And that is a great benefit to our system. We do not have long-term loans right now. So thanks to Doug and Joe for that. I always like to mention that because many of our peer communities are still saddled with that debt, even though their revenues are down.
And thanks to city council that have supported the budgets that we propose there. So that, just to add to Mike's comments, basically, as we get more information and get an idea as to what the proposed solution is, then we'd have an idea of the cost and we could figure out what the rate impact might be. So more to come on that, but thank you for that question.
Well, citizens are asking about that, so I'm glad to know.
Yeah, I mean, the number one complaint we get about our water system is the hard water. And I probably shared this story with you, so I'll make it brief, but I remember being at either Lowe's or Home Depot in the Hamilton area and overheard someone talking to an employee in the plumbing section. He said, where do you live? And he said, Oxford. He said, oh, you guys have horrible water there. He said, but actually he lived in an area where they're served by the rural water system that has much softer water. So obviously we all know that our water is hard here, and that's the reason for the study. And we'll get our options and report those to you with our recommendation. Okay, let's switch over to the wastewater funds, if you will. And the first one that we'll talk about will be the wastewater operating fund. And of course, if revenues are down for the water fund, they're also down for the sewer fund, wastewater fund. So if you take a look at the page 91, first one is for the wastewater plant, and we're showing a slight increase overall of 1.4%. Taking a look at the wastewater collection, which are the folks that are out in the field that maintain the sanitary sewers and the pumping stations, we're showing about a 3.7% increase in that program. Wastewater administration then is the allocation of the service director, deputy service director, environmental specialist, and we're showing an increase of about a 2.2%. Finance allocation, an increase of about just under 2%. MIS, the increase there is about 4.9%. City manager allocation about 2.6%. And then we have the HR communications assistant city manager. And that, once again, has to do with the changing nature of the positions allocated to it, about an increase of 40.9%. Then you have engineering allocation, about 2.3%. Legislative, no increase in that allocation to the wastewater fund. Wastewater fund insurance, no increase anticipated there, which then takes us to the wastewater improvement fund. And we're showing an increase there of about 37% overall. Nope, excuse me, I read the wrong line. Let me go to page 103, if you will. I'm with you, David. The print's a little small. What was that?
Are we on 101?
102.
Or two.
Yeah, so in the wastewater improvement fund, basically you'll see in the second box, it's the expenditures, and we're showing an increase of about 14.7%. And that's due primarily to
Meter systems?
what's that, Joe?
Is that meter system upgrades?
No, I put everything in one line because all the projects are the new projects I have to assign a different account number to. And this got turned around in about 3 days from when we did the CIP, so
Okay.
I need to sleep. So I just put it in one line.
Just my 2 cents, but with everything being so tight, it seems like this isn't the biggest priority for $800,000. That's just my 2 cents.
Okay. And then we have the same quadrants for the wastewater fund, wastewater capacity benefit fund. The northeast quadrant, no expenditure increase. Same for the northwest, southeast. And then for the southwest quadrant, this has to do with the, Mike, why don't you help me out here? My notes are a little sketchy on this one.
On which one, Doug? I'm sorry.
The southwest quadrant, does this have to do with our plan to extend the sanitary sewer to our land?
Yeah, I believe Joe and I talked about doing the Melissa sewer upgrade that will serve our 47 acres using.
Yeah, and so that's where the 75,000 comes from. We have to transfer it out of that quadrant into the wastewater improvement fund. So by just looking at that quadrant, you wouldn't know where it's being spent. So if you then take a look at the wastewater,
Again, it's just all lumped into one figure right now. It'll get broken out when we
okay.
do the final budget book.
All righty. All right. Thanks, Joe. I thought it was a little different. Any questions on the wastewater funds, I should say. All right, let's move on then.
Question, Doug.
Yes, Chantel.
And it's kind of lumping in with the water softening project as well. Because I think it's to piggyback on what Bill and David were saying before about priorities, and the money is there. It's just the way that we choose to spend it. And I'll preface this with, I'm not anti-water softening because I have a water softener in my home. I think I know most homeowners that do, but I'm just curious about how many of us ran for office on the basis of softening everyone's water. And are we basing this off of, I get it, we have hard water. I get it, the comment that was said. But there's so many other projects that many people have said is much more important. So it's hard for me to say that this is where all this money should be allocated whenever we could be looking. I know we're going to talk more about the solar. I know that there's projects that we could take with how important methane is, how much it contributes to climate change. We know that methane not only comes from the landfill, but also comes from sewage. How can we be looking at, if we're going to address our water system, can we try to make it smart and sustainable so that we can actually harness the methane from our sewage that other cities have done? So I know this is something that is a pretty big project, but I think it's something to consider in the future.
Yeah, and I might add that with these enterprise funds, they're proprietary. They're supported by user fees, so they can only be spent on water, wastewater. We cannot do other projects with them now. That's the limitation.
Right. That's where the methane capture would be spent on the wastewater treatment plant. So and I can send you papers about the technology about it later after the meeting, but it basically harnesses the methane, which I know part of the methane is being captured. Mike had shown me whenever we did that tour. Part of it is being captured for use at the plant itself, but there's actually mechanisms where you can capture the methane instead of it being just wasted or flared and then use it for energy. So I see that would be something that would be an update to the water waste treatment plant on its own.
Okay. Joe, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I know that everyone wants to get everything done at once, but actually they're planning a big project in the wastewater facility. I think it's what, Mike, about $1.8 million doing the next 2 years for the upgrade on the filtration, is it? The bio thing? Is that
The
correct, Mike?
the bio tower media replacement, we've been
Right.
putting off for several years now.
And that's something that has to get done because it's starting to fail a little bit. So I mean, I'm sure that that can be looked at in the future, but you know, that they are doing something, some big projects there. So that could be, I mean, we can look at it in the future, but you know, they can only do so much at one time.
So we've got, that's a major improvement as along with the aeration system replacement. And just a reminder, we do have beneficial reuse of the methane we capture. We keep all the influent coming into the plant as well as plant buildings. And so that's natural gas that we're not buying from Glenwood Energy. So it's not like we're just flaring off the gas. We flare off excess gas beyond our needs, which varies throughout the year. Thank
Which
you.
I think is so impressive that that has already been built into the design. What I'm talking about is taking that technology that you're already using for that facility, but putting it out towards residents. So it's a big infrastructure project, but I think it's something that will absolutely feed into Oxford's sustainability plans going forward. It's another way to augment with solar and geothermal. It's basically carbon that we could be capturing and using for energy.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Thank you, Chantel. All right, on to the stormwater fund, and that starts on page 111. And we're basically, if you take a look at page 114, oops, I went too far ahead.
Yeah.
And that's on
109.
page 110. What's that, Bill?
109.
Yep. Yeah. So basically, no proposed increase in the stormwater operating fund. Solid waste. This too is an enterprise fund. Basically, the user fee reflects our expenses. Of course, as we all know, we contract out for solid waste collection and disposal, and also for collection of recycling with Rumpke. And so what we're showing in the solid waste operating fund, the refuse fund, is a decrease in expenditures. And that is due primarily to the fact that last year we had a purchase of a tub grinder in there. And of course that has been purchased. So that's the main reason for the change in that budget, if you will. And let me go through the pages to solid waste collection and transfer, the program within the solid waste operating, and we're showing a decrease. And once again, that's because, and this is on page 115, the fact that we don't have the tub grinder in there this year. And on page 116, solid waste administration, slight increase of about 2.2%. Solid waste billing, an increase of about 1.8. And then we have the solid waste fund insurance program, and we're not showing any increase in that for next year. Solid waste operating, and this is basically the landfill post closure. We're showing no increase there for next year. And then we have on page 120, the landfill post-closure investment fund. And the summary of expenditures there is no increase for next year. And that's our solid waste and landfill funds. And I'm going to go through the various miscellaneous funds that we have. They begin on they're listed on page 121. We have 1, 2, 3, about 13 various miscellaneous funds. And of course, the first one that's listed is the Hotel and Convention Tax Fund. And basically, we're showing that we're going to be declining about 48%. And we only show in this the amount that we collect for the city. And the other portion, the other 3%, of course, is paid to Enjoy Oxford, the Visitors Convention Bureau. So we're showing a decline from the current year of about 48.9%. And that's reflected in the fact that the revenues are down.
While we're on this topic, could you provide any update on the collection of this from our short-term rentals that we've recently legalized? I know we've been talking about it for some time, but is there any movement on that collection?
Yeah, I've asked Chris to put together some information for us. Once again, I guess you could say we're focused on the CARES Fund and stuff, but I would hope that Chris will get back to me, before the end of the year with a proposal there. And, but that's about all I can share with you now. I know Sam has been involved with talking to Chris about it, and Chris has said he's worked with other communities. So I would hope we should have a proposal to you before the end of the year.
Okay, great, thank you.
But that's coming up quickly, isn't it? All righty. The next one is the Life Squad Gift Fund. We're not showing any proposed expenditures next year. And Mike, thank you for correcting my typo. I had a Life Squad Gift Fund, and Mike caught the fact that I left the F off. So I appreciate that. Would have been embarrassing. So I don't know why I had to share that with you, but I did. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund, we're not showing any increase there. And of course, as you know, we basically voted in 2020 to transfer this balance to the Family Resource Center. So, and as David pointed out, or basically he asked about the Airbnb and possibly taxing them, and council has discussed the possibility of putting some of that money into this fund. So that'll be for a future meeting. The next,
Can I just back on that, since I guess the second part of my last question is the hotel and tax revenue is basically we're a pass through and it goes directly to Enjoy Oxford. Is that right? So
3%. We keep the other 3%.
Okay, so does this mean when I look at the 48% decrease, does that mean that Enjoy Oxford's revenue is down 48%?
If that estimate holds true, that's exactly what it means.
Have we thought about, I'm sure you've been in conversation with them. I think that Enjoy Oxford is really important to us, especially for getting through. And I would love for them to be made whole somehow and not take, so anyway, that's just a separate conversation. Things are premised upon a certain revenue stream that's dried up. And I worry about them in this time because I think they provide really valuable services.
Yeah. Thank you, David. Okay. Employee Benefits Fund. This is basically the fund that we provide our health insurance, which is self-funded to the employees. We also pay life insurance premiums out of it. But it's we're basically showing a 0% increase in the expenditures. This, of course, depends on our experience. And over this past year, we've had some pretty favorable experience, unlike some other years. So once again, if our experience changes, we may have to amend that. The Internal Service Fund, this is basically a fund where the primary item here is fuel. So various departments, police, fire, service use fuel, and we purchase that fuel through this Internal Service Fund, and then we charge those various departments for what they use. And we're not showing any increase there on that. The next one is the Law Enforcement Trust Fund. And we're showing proposed expenditures of about $22,460. That's about 2.1% increase. And you can see that we're planning to purchase 10 police tablets and replace the SRT vests. The next one is the Enforcement and Education Fund. And we're proposing that we spend about 16 total, and 2,000 of that is for the Respect for Law camp.
Is that still going on with the COVID?
JJ, why don't you help me out there? That's a good question.
No, in 2020 it was canceled, which is why you don't see any expenditure to that in 2020, or it was budgeted, but we haven't spent that. So hopefully we'll be able to do it next year, but we'll see.
Thank you, JJ. Any other questions on that one? Okay, Board of Building Standards. Basically, this is a pass-through fund. We collect a certain amount for the state, and it's based on our permits. So we're projecting that the increase will be 0. Will come in at 6.9. It could be high, could be low, depends on the construction projects. So we collect a fee for both residential and commercial, and the fee is much larger for the commercial than it is the residential. The next one is the Special Assessment Fund, and this has to do with sidewalk assessments. And we're asking $150,000, which is what we budgeted the previous year. And when we get the money back, it goes into this fund. The residents, I believe, that decide to be assessed, they have 5 years to pay us back. And next one is the OVI Task Force. We're not showing an increase over this year's budget on that one. And then we have a series of South Point TIF district funds, and we had to set up, I believe it was 5 of them.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And this is based, yeah, go ahead, Joe. Why don't you explain it?
Oh, yeah. We took out debt to build the road that was just completed. And each of the funds we got revenue from, they took it out of the property taxes to pay for the debt. So this is just accumulation of those funds to help pay for the debt. We had to set
That
up,
I understood. My question was why we have 5 districts for that one street.
because they weren't contiguously, I think the buildings weren't contiguous. It's some law thing that we had to follow. It was very confusing.
Yeah, you would think we would just do one, but it as Joe said, it had to do with the layout of the buildings, and our legal advisor, which was not Coolidge and Associates, we had to go out and hire a special bond counsel, basically said that we needed to set up 5 TIF districts for that whole project there. And I can give you more on that later. It's been a while since I looked at that file. And as you know, it's a 10-year TIF. And as you can see here, we received money in 2019, 20, and 21. So we basically have 8 years if you include 2021. Any other questions on that South Point TIF district? And then, of course, we have an OAT property tax fund. We only have one. They didn't require us to set up for each phase. So we do budget about $1,050,000, and that's based on what we believe we collect from our estimates on the Oats Trail. And that too is a 10-year TIF. And you can see we began collecting that in 2019 too.
Excuse me, but help me understand who pays. Oh, that is the Oak property tax issue?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
you and I pay, Miami doesn't pay, they're tax
Got
exempt.
it.
Churches don't pay, they're tax exempt, school district doesn't. That was one reason why Miami favored the property tax over the income tax. And because we had looked at both options. And any other questions on the Oats Trail? Okay. The next one is, which is on page 138. And I guess I didn't list it on mine. There's a fire loss claims. And that's just out of the budget book, but nothing's happening there for next year. In the small business loan program is also a miscellaneous fund. And of course, that just occurred this year. And we're proposing that the expenditures for next year will be $30,000, but we'll have more for you on that at the next council meeting. And then another one is a local coronavirus relief fund. And this is a projection of what you can see what we're spending in 2020. We don't envision getting money in 2021, but that remains to be seen, especially if we continue with this slowdown in the economy. Then the last one, which is, as has been mentioned earlier, we've done pretty well because we've basically gone with a pay as you go rather than a pay as you use debt service approach. And we only have 2 outstanding debts that we're paying back. And the first one is, excuse me. First one is the Aquatic Center, and we have 22 years remaining, and it's $309,450. And as you know, we delayed the construction of the Aquatic Center until we were just about paid off for the park improvement bonds, which was for the community park and the Uptown Park. And so that one has been paid off, and now we have the Aquatic Center at $309,450. And then we have the South Point debt to pay off. And of course, we're paying that off with what you saw earlier, the revenue that we're receiving from those 5 TIF districts. And there's 8 years remaining on that, and that's a total of $307,825 per year. So with that, I'll entertain any other questions you might have before I turn it over to Joe. He wanted to present you some information as well, too. Any questions for me before I go completely hoarse? Okay, Joe.
Okay, it's gonna.
Then thank you all. And I don't think I recognized Heidi, who's with us tonight too. I said department heads, but I should have said, and also Assistant Finance Director Heidi. Thank you, Heidi.
Yeah, this first one's just showing why we decided to take the money out of the street fund balance. And you can see that it's increased by quite a bit over the last 5 years. And in 2019, it's due to the increase in the gas taxes. But we haven't had a bad winter since, what is it? I can't see. Since, I think it's 2014. So we didn't spend as much money on overtime or for salt and that. So that's one of the reasons why that fund has increased so much over time. And again, the way our finances are, we have to be creative as to how we're going to pay for equipment and our projects. And this was one way to do that, to keep the street department up on their equipment, since we don't have the money from the general fund to help pay for that this year. Then the next slides are I present these every year. I've been doing it since probably 2010. And this goes back to 2005. And what I do is I show what all our revenue is, operating expense in the general fund, and then show the overage of revenue compared to expenses. And the two things we have to transfer to. Back in the old days, it used to be the park debt. And we also have to transfer money to streets in order to receive our gas tax money, because the general fund has to kick in or so much money to be able to show that we should be receiving the gas receipts. And that's just something we have to do by state code. And what I usually do is I pass these out, and I don't know if anybody ever looks at them. So I thought I'd just present them. It won't take too long, but just to show you my reasoning. And one thing we're going to have to do starting next year is have a 5-year projection for all of our operating funds. And that's just the way the GFOA budget document's supposed to be reflected. But I've been doing this for the general fund for a number of years. And I showed my assumptions were, like the property tax increase by 1% going forward, a 2.5% increase in income tax, interest income, a 1% increase. Local government funds went up in 2021 because we had a new governor who was actually nice to cities. And the expenditures, I had a 2% increase, except in the public health, and that's the money that we fund the agencies. I kept that flat going forward, and it showed the ramp up just because there was how high our expenses were in security of person, fire and personnel. And that's when we started ramping up the fire EMS staffing, and that was at the time it was still in the general fund. So I just highlight that to show that why it went down so drastically from one year to the next. And then the transfers, the Cafford Improvement Fund, and that was for our lawsuit that we ended up owning all our land. And then transfer to the street department, I did a 2% increase. And what this is showing is, and this was back in the days when everything was good. So you can see what I call discretionary spending. That's the money after we do the necessary transfers. That's the money we can use for capital improvements or equipment. And you can see that, it's about 1.2 million going forward. And I'm sorry because everyone's in my way and I can't see over the far right of the screen. But that was a rosy prediction. That's before COVID-19 hit. And I also did a separate one last year and said, okay, what's going to happen? And it's not like I'm a soothsayer or anything, but I said, okay, we're going to get a recession in 2021. And what that would have affected would have been our income tax revenue. And that's the only one I really decreased. And I kept everything else the same. The assumptions are here. I'll send this out in an email so you can view it on your own leisure. But you can see that based on that, we went down from like 1.2 million to 790. So it's less money we got to spend on these projects. And it goes, that was just a slight decrease, showing a 2.5% decrease in income tax revenue and how it affects you long-term. Granted, it's going to go up, but so are your expenses. So you're not going to have the money to transfer to the other funds to do our improvements. And the next slide happens to be this year. And what I did is I put in what we had in the projected 2020 budget. You can see we're still doing okay. It's about a 1.3 million, but then it goes down to 486. And that's projecting that income tax revenue will go up. You can see in the highlights, I got 1.5% each year. And that's all dependent on how the economy recovers. And at this point, we really don't know. I'm not going to guess that it's going to recover at a blazing amount of speed because, as we know, Miami did cut $2 million from their payroll. And that has an effect on us, and that's going forward because they redid head counts as to how they spend their money at Miami. So going forward, it's going to be tight in the next few years to figure out how we can do any more capital improvements or how we can fund any other projects, or if we want to do more for agencies, it's going to be tight. We're going to have to cut out operations. That's just the plain truth of it. And again, when we go out to get, the last time we went out for bond ratings, the hard part to explain to Moody's, because they don't consider us, they do an overall view. They don't care we're a college town, but what they do look at is our main contributor to our income tax is Miami University. So they know that's an effect on us. One of the good things we have is we have a decent general fund balance, which offsets that. So we were able to maintain our same rate because we have a good fund balance. We didn't spend down when we had money coming in prior years. We transferred it out for the improvements for both this building, the library, and the old city hall. We paid cash. We didn't have to issue debt. We've transferred money out for various other projects. Last year, we transferred $600,000 out in December to beef up the capital improvement funds because we knew we were going to be doing the street lighting this year and another project. And so going forward, it's not looking the best. And also, I put down here these expenses that we that we're going to probably see. The one is the Oxford Cemetery. They've talked to us a few years ago about us taking over, and we pretty much have to do it by state law if their association is no longer present. And then now that we're doing the cable to the parks and Park View Arms, that's going to be additional $36,000 each year. So that's going to bring down that 480,000 down by 36 because we've got that increased expense because of the cable project we're doing this year. So that's just to keep you guys informed that, this COVID thing's really affecting us, and we're not going to be able to do a lot as far as capital projects go. We're going to have to do more creative thinking, sort of like we did with the street fund this year, going forward to be able to at least try to keep up pace with replacing equipment and doing paving roads. I mean, that's a big deal every year. Okay, and then the next one is just sort of give you a history of our, I call this a declining revenue stream. And this hit us all of a sudden back in when the Great Recession. You can see that big green thing. That was when we used to get a state tax. We don't get a state tax anymore. You can see the red bar is the amount of money we got from the state. In order to balance their budget, they cut ours. So going forward, I'm just keeping it flatline because we don't know what's going to go on in the state. And chances are, I mean, depending on who the governor is, they could come in again and cut funding to the city of Oxford. And the next slide just gives you the backup detail of showing you the actual, some people like numbers, some people like bar graphs. So I did present it both ways. The next one, the only difference is I added in the income tax revenue. And again, you can see that from our previous high of income tax revenue, estate tax, and local government funding, that we were at about 9.3 million back in, I believe that was 2008. It took us 9 years to recover to get back up to 9.3 million. This year or last year, we're at 10.4, and going out to the budget of 2021, we're at 9.2 million, say. So depending on, and the problem is, since we're more dependent on our income tax, the slower the income tax comes back, the slower we're going to get back up to we're at $10 million again. And that's if you know anything about compounding, you're just out that money. You're never, on the other chart, it was all rosy. We were going to be getting income tax revenue going in. You knew we weren't going to have we're going to have a recession at some point, but as soon as you have a recession, it's going to affect you going forward for a number of years. And I just included this so you have an idea of some of the challenges that we may be facing going forward in the next few years, depending on how fast the economy recovers. And again, I'll send this out in a PDF format so everyone can see it at their pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, any questions for Joe? And any final questions for me?
I have a question. I think a lot about what Joe had said about the possibility of wherever you live, whenever you work from home, and that's where you collect the income tax, that whole thing. And I can see how, let's say if that did go through, or even with what Joe's saying, I mean, so many people who work at Miami either choose not to live in Oxford or are unable to find housing that works for them as a young professional, or even as a person with a family, and maybe they're not on the higher income scale. So I see this as an investment of what can we do to make Oxford have as much accessible housing for people of all different socioeconomic statuses, and what attractive amenities are there for young professionals. So I just really think that, I mean, everything Joe is saying, I totally get the concern, and especially with that lawsuit that is coming out or wherever it is in that stage. And I look at that as, how do we double down on investing so that people want to be living here and they want to be here year round? And how do we support small businesses so that it is as easy as them to stay alive and to start a business and have a very diverse economy? So I think that, now is the time to invest.
Okay.
I'll be sharing with you this week in my weekly report. Rita did do an estimate based on 10, 20% or 30% of the people that work in Oxford but don't live here. And I'll share that with you. I didn't want to do it tonight because the numbers are bad enough. Because I mean, if it goes through, it's something we're going to have to really face, but it could have a significant income or effect on our income tax revenue, which would affect both the general fund and firing EMS. But again, I didn't want to forecast that because I don't know what's going to happen. So, I mean, you could do as many forecasts as you want, but it's only as good as the data you have currently. So,
David?
So I wanted to start first by thanking the city manager for presenting a budget to us, and all the hard decision making and sausage making and tough choices that staff and their requests and making those hard choices. And so I really appreciate all the very hard work and balancing a budget in a really tough environment. And I really appreciate being informed of what's going on, and it's really interesting, and I'm happy that the city's so well managed. I guess I would direct the question as I've been going through this, and this is to my fellow counselors. I guess I've just been reflecting, and I don't have an answer, and we don't need to discuss it tonight, is I'm thinking as a counselor, what's my role in this? I think it's very interesting to hear and about the choices made and be able to offer questions. But then my job as a legislator is to approve an ordinance based on the budget. And so I'm wondering where formative input is for a counselor into those tough choices you're going to make. Joe's laying out a scenario of a tough future environment based on our current revenue streams. One could view that, how do you solve that problem? Are there different ways to support your budget than 100% on the income tax, or 77% or whatever it is? You're making tough choices in the budget about how to spend money. And again, I guess as a counselor, I'm wondering, is my role just to ask questions and ultimately approve, or is there a process in which, I think Chantel was pointing out how great the CARES Act process was, in which there was a dialogue about how to make choices and balance them. And, I think that's what councils get elected to do. So I understand it's a city manager and a staff driven process. But, I guess I think that there's resources in the council that could assist in making tough choices if engaged in more than just an FYI way, to be honest. So that's just me. And it doesn't mean I need to get into the business of deciding whether it's time to replace the grit removal system at the sewage treatment plant. Those are operational decisions. But I think, as Chantel points out, the priorities guide the choices. And so, whether it's by having a strategic plan that guides the choices, or we have conversations about the broad contours of the budget, I just feel like I'm a wasted resource in this conversation. It was interesting to me, but I'm not sure what I bring to bear on it. And so that's just me, that's a reflection, as I'll end the meeting on that.
Well, let me just comment on that. I mean, as Joey pointed out, we don't have a lot of discretionary funding. And we have included some new initiatives, the street light conversion at $380,000, purchasing an electric car, the electric charging station, the comp plan that's in there. I mean, those are things that council spoke about those, and we were going to include those things. And so it's, unless we want to dig into the fund balance, which Joe doesn't want us to do, because once you do that, there's no point of return. I mean, we had planned to purchase those, to do those capital projects, and we brought the fund balance down. If we start spending more than we bring in, Joe's going to be very uncomfortable. But at some point, then you have to turn that spigot off, because as a organization, we do have to have a fund balance of, I would say, at least $2 to $3 million, because our revenues don't come in. Our income tax revenue comes in once a month. Our property tax revenue comes in twice a year for the most part. And so we have to be able to, have revenue to pay our bills. And of course, when we do our capital projects, if we don't have the money, for example, in the Oats Fund, we have to advance money. We've advanced it for other projects and stuff. So it's a balancing act for all of us. And I know we all want to do more, but we are concerned about what's happening at Miami and what the future portends for us. We don't know how long this sluggish economy is going to be. So I don't think you have to feel that way. I mean, and please understand, we are listening, but at this point, I don't see that we want to cut back any programs that we're now doing. For example, in recreation, we spend more than many cities spend on recreation. So anyway, Chantel.
And I can't remember the jargon specifically, but what was that term you used, Doug, about, was it zero-sum budget or?
Oh, there's different ways to look at it, but there's zero-sum budgeting where basically nobody has any money and we start from zero. But I don't think that's the way we want to go. Maybe what we should do is a citizen survey and ask some of these questions. For example, do you want to do the train station? Do you want to do the water softening project? And, you can get a random sample survey that's fairly indicative. Now, the big question would be, do you want to include students in that, or do you want to exclude them? When the students are here, they're the bulk of our population. When they're gone, our population drops down to probably about 7,000. So maybe that's something we want to look at. But of course, there's a cost for a citizen survey. I've done them in other cities. I've done them regularly, and it's useful because you get information about the different departments and the services they provide. And then you can put special questions in for projects and see if there is support out there.
I know in Minneapolis, St. Paul mayor himself would go out and meet in different parts of different neighborhoods and different coffee shops and restaurants, and citizens would just know it's an open office hours, and they would say, what can you imagine what this budget should look like? How would you allocate this money? So it doesn't have to be expensive. It's something that we can easily involve people. I know I mentioned it to Joe maybe 2 years ago or so. So that's something that I completely agree with what David is saying, and we need more people, more actual feedback from residents. And I think that the question isn't who do we exclude, it's how do we include as many people who live here as possible? And we are a university town, so that should be reflective of the people who live here. So I think that, I hope that and it's not about, and I'll say it again, I'm so frugal of a person as an individual and as a counselor, and I don't take any amount of money that we spend for granted, and I don't want to overspend. I want to reallocate what are our priorities. I want a low crime rate. I want less poverty. I don't want homelessness. I don't want hunger, and I want a sustainable town. So I want to do whatever actually achieves those goals. So how do we reallocate our funding so that that is possible? And how do we bring in people to tell us what their goals are? So I hope next year will be very different, and we're winding up on 2021. So that means as soon as this budget is done, that new process should start now.
Glenn, thank you, Chantel. Glenn?
First off, I'd like to appreciate everybody's efforts in generating this budget, because this year has been pretty wild. But I also would like to concur with the polling of the public regarding various endeavors that the city is undertaking. And to that point, a lot of the stuff that is being done now, so I'm talking about 2019, 20, and then into 21, happened when I got on the council 5 years ago. The public spoke. They said, we want this. We're tired of having these particular situations going on. And, it took 3 years to get bike lanes sorted out in the city. It's taken 3 years to get certain laws on the books that are currently now there. The capital improvement project regarding the water treatment plant, that was on our 5-year capital improvement plan. Now it's here. So the things that I hear a couple of the counselors talking about currently, I'm not disagreeing that these shouldn't be implemented. I just don't think they should be done right now. I mean, I think we're talking about maybe 1 to 3 years out in the future, just like all the other capital improvement projects that came before it. Like, I had my input on the things. I knew it was going to take a certain amount of time, and that time has come. And I'm okay with that. The pandemic has more than likely slowed some things down, but the last thing that I want to see is us dipping into a fund balance, because we don't know what's going to happen in the future, and the economy could take a serious turn in the next couple of months. There's been a lot of chatter about it, and Miami has already made their inroads in, I think, they're cutting they already cut 2 million. There's talks about even more, and those things are going to directly affect us. So again, like, I appreciate all the stuff that's in here right now. It seems like we have enough stuff to say, look, Oxford is making moves, and we're doing things that we have listened to the public, and we're trying to be a progressive city and provide amenities that people are looking for. And I'm just hoping that we can sustain that in the next couple of years or so.
Thank you, Glenn. Jason?
Thank you. So if we have investments that we know are going to pay off, or we can be fairly sure they're going to pay off in 5 to 10 years, does that give us any room to borrow now or cut into some of those funds because we know it will pay off in time? If I said, we'll have a return on investment of 5 years, what kind of wiggle room would that allow us to invest in something?
Well, let's use the conversion of the streetlights to LED. I mean, that's going to take us 7 years, and we're going to see a reduction in our utility costs over time. So you know, I guess it's a hard one to answer because I need to know what the project is and you know, what the payback is. But certainly I think there's merit to that.
Yeah,
Joe?
I would think there's some things that we might be able to work out there
Yeah.
that doesn't sacrifice our financial security right now, that we know we'll be better off in the future. And so if we can fit it in, we should definitely look into doing that. So I don't know if that means figuring out what part of a fund balance we can cut into, how we can rework discretionary funds, or if we want to borrow. But if we can feel secure in something paying off in X amount of years and then getting revenue from it, I think we should definitely look into that and not just push it aside this year.
Yeah. Well, and you know, we talk about affordable housing, and as you know, we have this proposal from the church group, and we're working on that. And as we pointed out in the budget, we're planning to spend in the Southwest quadrant money to help get this project forward, because one of the stumbling blocks is the extension of that sewer. And we decided that we would, it makes sense for us to extend it to help council achieve their goal of affordable housing for the elderly. And, you know, so, you know, we're doing our very best to help you meet your goals and align them with them, but we're also trying to make sure we don't mess up our core services. And, you know, if we, for example, don't do a good job with snow removal, you're going to hear about it real soon. And you know, other programs like that, that I think a lot of people take for granted here in Oxford, because, and I'll hats off to my staff because they do such an excellent job. I get very few complaints in my office about police or fire, or service, or any of them, planning, so on and so forth, because I think we pride ourselves in providing excellent service to the community, because we live in this community and we think a lot about it, as you all do. Joe?
Yeah, I know back in the early 2000s, there was a big push for energy conservation, and they would set up programs. You'd get somebody coming in and they would do all the upgrades for you up front, and you would pay them back with the utility reduction. I mean, that was really big for a while. That was back, you know, when we had to dip in a recession around 2001 to get the projects done like that. So there are different mechanisms like that, but they aren't always available.
Can you give us an idea, not now, obviously, in real time, but can you give us an idea what amount we could work with if it is an investment we can trust to pay us back in time, right? What is financially secure to cut into? Also, I was wondering, we haven't talked about the revenue side at all. Is there any other additional routes that we haven't discussed? You know, we've discussed minor ones like short-term rentals and things like that. And at one point we were talking about potentially opioid settlement funds potentially coming. I don't know where that stands.
I haven't heard anything on that, Jason. I don't have any news to report to you on that. You know, but yeah, I mean, at one time, now this has been probably 10 years ago, we talked about an admissions tax. And of course, Miami was not very happy with our discussion on that, because basically it would be on their events. And I think they would probably argue that we don't have the capability to do that, but they do that in other communities. Obviously, there are other communities that have a higher income tax rate, but you know, I think we're all very frugal, and I think we want to basically do all that we can do with our existing resources before we think about increasing the income tax or the property tax. I mean, remember, we did increase the property tax. We used to have the lowest property tax rate, and that's no longer the case when we added on the Oates levy, but that was something that we wanted to do, and the community supported us. And but you know, we can have those discussions later if that's a route council wants to consider.
I'd like to consider it. You know, I think a solar project, for example, we don't have to do the whole full-blown thing, but we could get started. And I think that pays back. And the longer we wait, then the longer the payback.
I'd like to say that I want to agree with Glenn and his points about how the things that we decided years ago when we were first elected are now, coming to full fruition and are still on the budget. I think this is you've worked very hard. The city staff has worked very hard to make a balanced budget. This is very, very important. I think you've done a terrific job. And I think that everything has ramifications. So that, for instance, the Oats Trail, which involved a levee, means that this is an attraction, that more people come to Oxford. There's more recreation, that it's a more pleasant place to live. And that has all kinds of ramifications. Everything has ramifications, whether it's a sewer line so that potentially we can develop the area on 732. That's thinking ahead, and that kind of thinking is very important. I would like to, almost all the projects seem to have this kind of broader thinking and this kind of planning, and I think that's just great. Of course, we will be thinking of new projects moving in the future, but right now this is a good and sustainable plan as far as I can tell.
Well, I'm going to turn it back over to Mike. I've got some guests at my house that I'd like to go visit with. So hopefully we can wrap this up soon.
All right. Thanks, you guys. I know that's a lot of numbers to sit through, and I really appreciate the input at the end that you were able to contribute that. So we'll keep talking about all this. And do I have a motion to adjourn? Moved by Mr. Snavely, second by Mr. Pritchard. Mr. Elliott, we call the roll so we may adjourn.
Okay, Councilor Southard,
Yes.
Councilor Ragu,
Yes.
Councilor Prithridge,
Yes.
Councilor Ellerby,
Yes.
Councilor Bracken,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Snavely,
Yes.
Mayor Smith.
Yes.
Hey, thank you all very much.